Good morning, everybody. I hope that you're having a good morning. I'm sorry for the slight delay in getting these up and available this morning, but we will take care of that as soon as possible and rectify that as quickly as we can. This morning we are on chapters 17 and 18, and we are going to look at three takeaways or three lessons from these two chapters. And as we talked about yesterday when we read them, there's a lot of very vivid imagery that you find in chapter 17 and 18. But let's point out some things from this particular chapter because there's a number of interesting lessons to be pulled from it. The first thing that I want to mention from chapter 17 is actually more just an analyzing of the setting. Because you have the statement in verse 1 that it is the burden against Damascus. We talked about at the beginning of chapter 17 that Damascus is the capital of Syria. And yet you get down just a little bit further into the next few verses, and he's going to, in many ways, combine what happens with Syria to what happens with, as he puts it in verse 3, Ephraim. Now, Ephraim is somewhat of code word, or it's the designation that will often be used in prophecy to the northern kingdom of Israel, as a way of distinguishing them from the southern kingdom of Judah, because they are both Israel from the standpoints of being children of Israel, but they would call the northern one Ephraim and the southern one Judah. And so Syria has been tied in many different ways to Ephraim, to the northern kingdom. And the reason for that seems to be, if you go back to chapter 7, to the beginning of that long message in chapter 7 through 12, what you have is Syria and the northern kingdom of Israel in an alliance against the people of Judah. And so when you come here to chapter 17 and you have this burden or this message of woe against Damascus, what God is telling the people of Syria is that because you have allied yourselves with Israel, with that northern kingdom, and they are going to face my judgment and my wrath, you are going to receive the same judgment and wrath. You have tied yourselves to this kingdom, and you are going to face the same desolation that they are from the hands of the Assyrians. It's an interesting lesson to pull out when you consider that who we have as our friends can either raise us up or they can tear us down. That we need to be careful about who we select as our friends, who we tie ourselves to. Some would even take this into the realm of who you marry and things of that nature. But certainly you have a situation where there is going to be judgment brought upon Damascus, at least in part, because of the relationship that they have with the northern kingdom of Israel. Now, certainly, Damascus has done plenty of things that is worthy of judgment. They have plenty of practices with their idolatry and their various other things that make it so that they are worthy of the judgment of God. And make no mistake, they're not innocent bystanders by any means. But the choices that they have made as to who they have allied themselves with and the choices that they've made to go after the kings of Judah are going to be a part and parcel of the judgment that God is going to bring against them. And so recognizing a bit of the framework of it pulls out a lesson for us on the choices that we make as to who we build relationships with and who we tie ourselves to. The second thing that I found in chapter 17 is in verse number 7, where here the illustration is made by the Lord through Isaiah. He says, "In that day a man will look to his Maker, and his eyes will have respect for the Holy One of Israel. He will not look to the altars, the work of his hands. He will not respect what his fingers have made, nor the wooden images, nor the incense altars." When the judgment comes, God says those who see it, those who are involved and in the center of it, will look to their maker. And the emphasis here is there is only one maker for mankind. He says he's not going to look to his altars. He's not going to look to the work of his hands. He's not going to respect what his fingers have made, because none of those things, none of those idols, none of those high places, none of those offerings and sacrifices that he has made to his own made-up deity that he created, none of those things are going to help. And so he will look to his maker. There does come a point where people will follow after, or people will turn to what has been there all along and they've tried to ignore. It is interesting to see when you have individuals in the midst of a crisis or in the midst of a disaster who will all of a sudden take up praying, even though they have failed to even recognize the existence of God leading up to that particular point. But they are willing to look to their maker in a time of crisis. That's the kind of attitude that God is talking about here. Things are going to go to the point that a man is going to be willing to set aside all of the things of his own creation and look to his maker. When troubles come, there is only one place to turn, and that is to the one who is responsible for us being here. And then in the third place, a lesson from chapter 18. And chapter 18 is a little bit confusing, and I think in part because of the headings that some people have put on it. In my Bible, when you come to chapter 18, you have the heading that says this is a proclamation against Ethiopia. And yet when you read the text, that's not what it says. It says, "Woe to the land shadowed with buzzing wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia." This is, from what we can understand and from what we know, this is talking about the nation of Cush, which is actually in the southern part of Egypt and spreading down to the south and over to the west. But notice it's not a woe that is necessarily being laid out in this particular area. Rather, it is a watch. He says, send ambassadors by the sea and go and send this message. And then he says in verse 3, all inhabitants of the world and dwellers on the earth, when he lifts up a banner on the mountains, you see it. When he blows a trumpet, you hear it. And so on and so forth, going down through. This is not a judgment call on the people that are beyond Egypt, the people that are beyond Ethiopia, these people of Cush, but rather this is a call to watch and to see what God is going to bring. In other words, pay attention to what I'm doing. The interesting thing is, historically, Cush was known to be a very strong warring nation. They had a strong army, and they were ones that nobody really wanted to mess with. They were also ones that some have surmised, or some have supposed, had ambassadors that had been sent to the kingdom of Judah in this particular day and time to talk about an alliance between Judah and Cush, especially in the face of Syria and the northern kingdom coming together. Instead, God says, watch. Watch what it is that I am going to do. Watch the things that are going to happen, because you need to understand what is taking place. And so he gives the proclamation of the desolation of Damascus. He's given the warnings against the northern kingdom of the things that they are going to face, and the fact that they are going to be downtrodden under the foot of the Assyrians. And then he tells those on the other side of the Red Sea, those on the other side of the borders of Judah, to watch and to pay attention to what is taking place. There is a time to act, and there is a time to pay attention. And God tells these individuals, this nation beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, to pay attention and to learn from what is going on around them. Certainly there is a lesson there for us, that we need to be watchful, that we need to be paying attention to what is going on around us, and that we don't need to have our head in the sand, as it were, and we don't need to, at the same time, be so quick to rush into things that we don't really know what's going on. We just want to do something. Well, sometimes doing something is the wrong thing. Sometimes we need to take time to watch, to pay attention, and to just be able to examine the situation. And that's what God is calling on this nation to do. So those are the three things that I've pulled out of chapters 17 and 18. I hope that they've been beneficial to you, and I look forward to seeing what it is that you find in this particular text. Have a great day.